welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name's Wilbur Harrell. I'm the librarian here at the Linnean Society, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this latest instalment of our Linnean Lens series, and we're keeping it in-house this time around. We're joined by our very own Dr. Isabelle Charmantier, who's going to talk about one of Carl Linnaeus's lesser known but most beguiling manuscripts from his early days. The manuscript we're going to look at today is very beautiful, but it's also very small, about 15 centimeters or so, I would say. We've got a pretty good camera set up here. To the untrained eye, it looks a lot like my iPhone, but it does the job. You'll be able to get an overall sense of the object, but Carl Linnaeus's handwriting is famously not easy. You might not be able to make out the details of the text, but we do have, I'm pleased to say, a fully online version of this object, Spolia Botanica, which you can access via Linnean Online, and I'll post a little link to the chat as the talk gets underway. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to hand over to Isabelle Charmantier, who will be talking about Spolia Botanica.
Thank you, Will. And as Will says, this particular manuscript, which you can see at the top here in the document camera, and we'll blow that up when we look at the item itself, is part of our Naturalist Notebooks exhibition. And if you come in to see the exhibition, you can see it in the library. So it's quite an early manuscript from the Swedish naturalist Carl Linnaeus. And that's why I'm going to give a little bit of background using a PowerPoint presentation, which I will share now, and hopefully not spend too much time on it so we can have a look at the object itself in just a second. So let me share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. All good, Will? Yeah. So the translation of the title of the manuscript is The Spoils of Botany, Spolia Botanica, hence the title of the talk. Just a quick introduction on to give a bit of background on Linnaeus's birth, childhood, and student years, because this is a manuscript that was produced in his student years. Linnaeus was born in and I do apologize if there's anyone who speaks Swedish or is Swedish in the audience. I will probably massacre quite a few Swedish names during the course of this presentation, so my apologies. So Linnaeus was born in Roshult in 1707, and then his father became the pastor of Stenbrohult, both of which are in the county or the province of Småland in the south of Sweden. And Linnaeus grew up in Stenbrohult, and this is quite important because there are lots of mention of Stenbrohult in the manuscript that we're about to go to. And then he was sent to school in Växjö for his school years, and then started at university looking at medicine mostly, and this is where he was studying the natural world. His first year at university, and I'm going to introduce now a cast of characters that is also quite important for the manuscript, so bear with me as we go through quite a few people that were important for Linnaeus at this time of his life. The first person is Kilian Stobaeus, who was a physician in Lund, where Linnaeus spent the first year of his university in 1727-1728. And Linnaeus, I think, from the get-go, and I think this is something he retained throughout his life, was quite charismatic and quite winning, I suspect, because throughout his university years, he managed to charm, I would say, a few key people in the universities he was in, and managed to make them supporters for him. So Stobaeus was one of those. And then when Linnaeus relocated to Uppsala a year later in 1728, he found favor very quickly with Olof Celsius, who was professor of theology and the uncle of Anders Celsius of the thermometer fame. And Linnaeus, when he was in Lund, lived with Stobaeus. When he got to Uppsala, within a few months, he managed to find the support of Celsius and was living in Celsius's house. And I just thought I would insert here one of the manuscripts that we have in the collections, which is a plan of Celsius's house, which I think must have been done about the time where the manuscript that we're about to see was done. So around 1729, and you can really see, I hope my cursor works. Hopefully you can see that. Dr. Celsius, that's his room. Mrs. Celsius is here. The library is on the other side, and right opposite the library is Carl Linnaeus. So that was Linnaeus's room. Similarly, after a few months in Uppsala, Linnaeus moved from Celsius' house to Rudbeck's house as he became the tutor of Olof Rudbeck, who was a professor of medicine in Uppsala, of Olof Rudbeck's son. So that's the context for the manuscript. As we'll see, it dates from 1729. So Linnaeus is 22. He's trying to find a job, and I think as part of this, because he was from a relatively poor background, he was courting various professors, and at the time then he produces quite a lot of similar manuscripts in the same period. And the two that I'm going to show here are not with us, but they're in the library of Uppsala University, but they're from about the same period, and each of these manuscripts is dedicated to various different tutors and professors of the university. One of the most famous one is probably this one, which is entitled Preludia Sponsaliarum Plantarum, which is basically means a prelude to the marriages of plants, also dated from 1729, and it's something that Linnaeus offered to Olof Celsius when he was living with him at Christmas of 1729, if I remember well. This is quite an important manuscript because this is Linnaeus talking about the sexual reproduction of plants, which of course in later years will become the basis of his sexual system of classification. Another manuscript, which is very similar in shape and size and cover as the one we're going to look at today, is the work on an uncommon plant called Charles's scepter, Sceptrum Carolinum, which Linnaeus saw on a special expedition with Olof Celsius in June 1729, and then again with Rudbeck's son, whom he was then tutoring a few months later. The particularity of this particular manuscript is, as the little inscription at the back of the title page indicates, which I have reproduced here on the right, is that Linnaeus wrote this dissertation for money. He writes there, "I have written this thesis in one day for 30 copper dollars. Another has received the credit for it." And as we will see, the Linnean Society, and I will show a couple, has other manuscripts dating to that same period. So clearly quite a fruitful period. Linnaeus wrote a series of autobiographies, which are famously all in the third person singular. And he, in his earlier Vita or life autobiography, Linnaeus describes how Celsius in 1729 took him along on field trips to find plants, so that we know that on the 24th and on the 30th of June, both Celsius and Linnaeus traveled to Roslagen, an archipelago which faces the Uppland coast, not very far from Uppsala, to collect some specimens. And then they did another trip, a similar trip in September 1729. And I think the manuscript we're about to see is a direct result of these trips, probably written in the course of the summer of 1729, and he entitled it Spolia Botanica. And the particularity of this catalogue is that it catalogues 3 different regions of Sweden, which you have here. So Småland, Skåne and the archipelago of Roslagen. And the particularity is that these three different regions, or the plants from these three different regions, are classified according to three different botanists. So Småland is classified following the method of Joseph Piton de Tournefort, the French botanist of the 17th century. Skåne according to Augustus Rivinus, a German botanist, and Roslagen according to the English naturalist John Ray. And we'll see how important these three were and the relative importance of each of them in another of Linnaeus's manuscript. The particular manuscript Spolia Botanica was dedicated to Laurent Roberg, yet another person in the cast of character, who was professor of medicine at Uppsala University. And the dedication is, as you will see, is dated 5th of May 1729. But within the preface, we know that the rest of the manuscript mentions the June trips to Roslagen. So clearly indicating that Spolia was not finished until at least after June. And I think that this little catalogue was really meant as a card in the job market. And that's also obvious from a letter dated 4th of July, which Linnaeus sent to the Uppsala Universitetskonsistorium, so the administration of Uppsala University. And in this letter, he's applying for the job of a gardener, now that he says now that the previous gardener has died, and he refers to his knowledge of gardening and mentions that he has already made a catalogue of plants in Småland and Skåne. And I think that catalogue is the manuscript I'm about to show you. So this little manuscript is really kind of a role to play. And I think the dedication to Roberg is actually quite interesting because Linnaeus was not so very fond of Roberg. There's another letter to his tutor back in Lund, Kilian Stobaeus, which is dated from about 6 months later in April 1730, where Linnaeus describes how Roberg is very sick from an abscess between the shoulder blades, and basically he says he just wants him to pass away, because he says if he recovers this time, Linnaeus is afraid he will never die. So it's really clear here that Linnaeus is at a period where he needs a job. He is trying various different avenues. And I think in order to really fully understand this little manuscript, we need to ignore his later success and try and feel the hunger and desperation of these early years when he really, really wanted to succeed, and that burning ambition that is coming to the fore. And I think this is something that Gunnar Broberg, whose biography, The Man Who Organized Nature, came out, is it 2 years ago now, something like that? In translation, yeah. He brings out very well in his book the uncertainty of these years at university, Linnaeus's poverty, his need to court professors, to show them his worth, his ambition to transform natural history, and his love of the natural world, as we will see. So I will end my presentation here, and we can turn to the manuscript. Just a couple of comments before I turn to the manuscript. So as Will says, you might not see some of the details, even though I'll try and bring it up closer to the camera. But as Will says, it's online, it's been digitized, as is pretty much everything that else that I'm going to show you today. The second thing is, and I would like to stress that I'm not a botanist, and so what follows is going to include some plants, but my knowledge of plants is limited. That's not where my expertise lies. And I would very much welcome a botanist to have a look at the manuscript and kind of look at it more in botanical terms. I would also like to highlight that I couldn't have done this presentation or indeed the cataloguing work without the transcription and publishing of this particular manuscript that was done in 1888 in this book by Ewald Ehrling, which dates back to 1888. And once again, this is a Swedish title, so apologies. Carl von Linné's Ungdomsskrifter. For those of you who are interested, the transcription is here, but it's also, you can find it on BHL, on Biodiversity Heritage Library. And you'll find the whole transcription with identification of the plants that Linnaeus mentions as well. So let's switch to the book, and I will get up. So just find a way to put my notes. Sorry, hang on. So let's start with the cover. As you can see, as Will says, it's quite a small volume. It's also, while I was handling it, it's quite fragile, so I have to be quite careful. Preempting any potential question about the lack of gloves, because those types of questions tend to come back. We do not wear gloves in archives. You're more at risk of ripping paper if you do. So this is why I'm not wearing gloves, but I have just washed my hands so they're nice and clean for me to handle the book. The cover is interesting. It's and thank you to Janet Ashdown for giving me information on the cover, on the type of covers that we have here. If anybody is interested, Janet has done an article on manuscript covers not that long ago, and this is something that I forgot to mention to Will. Otherwise, he would have been prepared to put the link in. Sorry, Will. So it's a paste paper design, quite typical for the time. It would have been cheaper than marbled paper, which looks like this, and this is a manuscript we're going to look at in a second. But this is marbled paper. It's basically mixed paint with paste and then painted over the paper, and then a sharp pen is used to carve out the design that you see. And I can bring it slightly up if needed. It's very possible that Linnaeus made the notebook himself. That other notebook that I've just shown you, I'm pretty sure Linnaeus built it himself in a way, sewed it and put it together himself. One of the keys is that there's very few blank pages in here, which is an indication that it was made to design. And paper at this point for Linnaeus is quite expensive. So it is possible that Linnaeus would have made this himself. It would have been cheaper at a time when he was clearly struggling financially. We have in the collections a few other notebooks with very similar paper. You've seen the one in Uppsala University. There is also this one. Now, this is a later binding where you see the Linnean Society here. This is a series of manuscript that Linnaeus entitled Fundamenta Botanica, and this particular volume dates to 1731. But you can see the same kind of cover here. So clearly something that he used quite regularly at the time, and again at the back. I'm delighted that whoever had this bound in the 19th maybe century, early 20th, kept the original covers. Okay, so that's the cover, and then I'm going to start leafing through it and making comments as we go. So as we go, and maybe I'll leaf through it quickly, it's quite striking with Linnaeus's manuscript how much they look like printed books. And I think because this was designed to be a presentation manuscript, and we will discuss towards the end whether this ever made it to Roberg. I don't think so, because it's still in our collections, but this was very much made to look like a printed work. So that when you open it, so you've got the brief title here, Spolia Botanica, Carl Linnaeus, or C. Linnae. You've got a frontispiece and a title page, and I will come back to these. And you can see that it's really made out like a book. And then when you leaf through the book, you've got the dedication, the note to the reader, which is basically the preface. And then each section, each of the three sections of the three different regions is highlighted with a title, and there are page number, and then there is also a running head throughout so that you can locate which region you're in. So here you're in Småland, further on you're in Skåne or Scania, and then at the end Roslagen. And you can see also that the plates have been really made to look like engravings with plate numbers and figured numbers. Okay, so we go back to the beginning. And I will start with the frontispiece. Now, this is the one I think that might be a little bit difficult to see properly. And if anybody wants, I have a slide where I've put this on just in case you might want to see further detail. I will try and bring it up slightly. Well, actually, I can't because I have to highlight. It basically depicts the neighborhood of Stenbrohult. So you've got Stenbrohult written here. And I will read a description of the region of Stenbrohult as we look at this depiction of it. Because Linnaeus was very attached to the place where he grew up, and I think there's at least 2 or 3 descriptions which are quite lyrical of this heavenly place in Linnaeus's words. In one of his autobiography, he says Stenbrohult is a church furnished with the delightful plants which Sweden displays, for it lies near the Lake Möcklen. So you've got the lake here. And I don't know if you can see, but there are little boats in the lake that are depicted. The Lake Möcklen here extends this, so this is still Linnaeus talking, in a 1/4 of a mile long bay and almost reaches the foundation of the church, which is here. There's a little kirk written just above. Can you see okay, Will? Or am I moving too much? Yeah. The level farmlands surround the church on all sides except the west, where Möcklen displays its limpid waters. A little way off, the fine beech woods show themselves towards the south, and these are here, with Taxos, which is a hill, a high hill to the north, and Moklanas beyond the lake to the west. To the east, the fields are sheltered from the north by coniferous woods, which are here and depicted slightly differently from the beaches to the south. And from east and south are pleasant fields and leafy trees. The meadows resemble more the most splendid groves and richest flower gardens than their actual selves, so that one may sit in summer and hear the cuckoo and with other different bird song, insects piping and humming, and at the same time view the glowing and splendidly colored flowers. One cannot but turn giddy at the creator's magnificent arrangement. So there are annotations throughout, some of which are quite difficult to decipher. So there's kirk here. Here you have Lilla Stenbrohult, which I think means small Stenbrohult, for example. So this is quite a depiction of, and the river kind of flowing into the lake here, of one of Linnaeus's favorite place on earth, I think. The title page follows with the main title, Spolia Botanica, Sive Plante Rariores, so or rare plants of the region of Småland, Skåne, and Roslagen, which have been observed and listed. And then you've got the author's name, Carl Linnaeus. He is proud of his origin, so he's put Småland, of Småland. And then the date, 1729, and the place of publication, in a way, Uppsala. And as like for every manuscript and books in Linnaeus's library, this manuscript was annotated by our founder, James Edward Smith, here when he purchased the collections of Linnaeus. And it just says, from the own library of Linnaeus, 1784. Okay, so that's the title page. After the title page, we have the dedication to Laurent or Lars Roberg, which, as I said, was dated 5th of May, 1729. So possibly one of the first things he wrote in here before he went on to write the catalogue. It's followed by about 4 pages of a preface. So in this introduction, Linnaeus describes the geography of the 3 regions and how the topographia here at the or the botanical topography of each is interesting. And that he has decided that he will only describe what is rare or typical for each region. And he says he will concentrate on these 3 regions because, and I quote, I have not yet had the opportunity to visit many places in Sweden. And because they are so different, or two of them at least are very different, that makes it all the more interesting. So he starts here with Smålandia, and he describes it as being covered with sand, gravel, hills, moors, meadows, tables, spruces, and large forests. He continues saying, everywhere there are fresh springs of various kinds, but strangely, stone, sand, and gravel are found everywhere. He includes the description of Stembrohult, which you can see here. Which he describes as a queen amongst sisters, preferred to others even in the location of rare and wondrous herbs, not often to be seen elsewhere in the country. Then on this page, you have the description of Scania, so Skåne, which has, according to Linnaeus, a completely different soil and situation. There are few forests, hills, and lakes. Instead, the whole country is a plain consisting of clay soil. And you've got the mention of Lund, where Linnaeus spent a year, his first year of university, and he describes how he spent some time botanizing outside Lund during that year, and he really noticed how different the Skåne flora and geology were from that of Småland. He also mentions taking, and I quote, the sea species either at Malmö or Loma, which is 1 mile from Lund, where I often went to collect petrifications in the sand by the seashore. And then the last page of the preface is about Roslagen. And he highlights that in terms of soil and other qualities, it's very similar to Småland. It lies roughly in the same area. And he mentions here his trips in June 1729 with Olaf Celsius. And he also mentions that this was supported by the Royal Swedish Society of Sciences in Uppsala University. So after this preface, we get into the meat of the manuscript, and we'll go through each of the 3 regions, and I will highlight a few things from each section. So we start with the plants of Småland, which according to Linnaeus here is following the method of the French botanist Tournefort. So I will move to the other manuscript just as a little interlude. This is one of my favorite items actually in the whole Linnean collections. It's Linnaeus's Manuscripta Medica, which if you've been on a tour, you will probably have seen. This is also in the exhibition, and it's been I think it was our very first Linnean Lens back in 2021, something like that. Anyway, Will is going to post a link to that original Linnean Lens if you're interested in this particular manuscript. It's basically a manuscript with lots of extracts from Linnaeus's readings and taking notes from books, mostly from Celsius or Rudbeck's library. So it's interesting to contrast the 2 manuscripts, because Manuscripta Medica is taking notes. Spolia Botanica is being out in the field and applying these notes. And Manuscripta Medica, again, as you can see, a whole title, etc. And it has lots of notes on botany. And amongst these notes are notes on the 3 naturalists or botanists that are used, whose classification is used in Spolia Botanica. So you have here all the methods of plants of Tournefort, which is rendered, completely copied from both Tournefort and another botanist called Valentini, who had extracted Tournefort's classification system, rendered, as Linnaeus tends to do, into diagrams and tables. And this whole classification of Tournefort in Manuscripta Medica goes on for a few pages, and you can see again the very economical use of paper. Tournefort's classification depended on, well, he basically divided plants into 2 main subdivisions, herbs and on one side, and then trees and shrubs. And then he divided them on the basis of their flower and the fruit, and that became 22 classes. And the fact that Linnaeus was considered Tournefort's classification important is highlighted by the fact that it's the first of the botanical classification to be listed in that particular work. But we also find this very interesting book, which is in his library, which is a copy of Joren's Vademecum Botanicum, which dates to 1717, I think, which Linnaeus purchased. And it's not often that we have a mark of Linnaeus's purchases in his book in Lund on the 25th of September 1727. So this is a very early purchase again. And you can see on the page, it's a book that is interleaved as well, which means that blank pages face each printed page in order to allow for annotations. And you can see that on the interleaf that faces the title page, there are lots of notes about Tournefort, listing most of his major works. And then, which is even more special, there are illustrations of the flowers with annotations by Linnaeus. And these illustrations, this one highlights the main parts of a flower, but then you've got the main classes of Tournefort's system illustrated. And the drawings are so good that we're not sure that it's actually Linnaeus. I don't know. Linnaeus is not particularly a good draftsman, and this is, in my opinion, far too good for him, but you never know. He may have had the time and the inclination when he was young. So the Tournefort is clearly a huge influence on Linnaeus. And I think this is why Spolia Botanica starts with Tournefort. I'm going to stay on this page for a little bit, just to show you the structure of each entry, which is quite typical of Linnaeus, and we're used to that from his later work. But this is at a stage where he's very early on in his career, and yet he's got that very systematic way of displaying information about a particular species. So you start, I don't know if you can see this properly. Shall I bring it slightly closer? You start each entry with, and remember this is 1729, so we're before the binomial nomenclature in 1753. So we start with the long Latin descriptive names. So in this case, this is Jansiana angustifolia autumnalis major, and then follows a series of annotations on bibliographical references and the works that he refers to. So inevitably, you always get CB, which stands for Caspar Bohin. Tourne is Tournefort, and then Tabernet is Taberna montanus. And each time you have the reference to that particular plant in their work. And then follows in a mixture, very strange, very idiosyncratic mixture of Latin and Swedish, notes about the location of where Linnaeus saw the plant. What's interesting about this page is the naming of plants for his supporters and his patrons. And so you have here Celsia in honor of Olaf Celsius, and Rudbeckia in honor of Olaf Rudbeck. Rudbeckia is particularly interesting because it's clearly been written over something else. Interestingly, these genus names, Celsia and Rudbeckia, were replaced in Flora Laponica, which dates to 1737, with Andromeda and Linnea. So in fact, it looks like back in 1729, Linnaeus had already appropriated this particular plant for himself and had attributed his own name. So I think if you look closely, the R of Rudbeckia actually is a transformed L, and if you look underneath, it does say Linnea. Can you see? Okay, or I'm gonna put it back down. It might be actually clearer. It's we don't want to move the camera, so we've had to make it wide enough for the later things that we're going to show. So it's a little bit awkward. And I think maybe, or according to various historians as well, Linnaeus probably, and this is actually according to Erling, who transcribed and annotated this manuscript, Erling thinks that he changed Linnea to Rudbeckia because Linnaeus realized that it might look overblown, overly ambitious, and slightly ridiculous in the eyes of Roberg, to whom the manuscript was dedicated. Because this will become Linnea Borealis, essentially, Linnaeus's own plant, it's interesting to see what he writes in a mixture of Swedish and Latin at the bottom here, where he describes the location. So he says you can find it near Hallerid and Pieterid. It's rare in Uppland, in Upplandia raro, but it's copiosissimi, so very copious and very abundant in Nerissia, which is Närke, which is a Swedish traditional province situated in the south-central Sweden, Laponia, so Lapland, and Roslagen, or Roslagen, to which he will go, where he will go with Celsius. Another example, if we turn, so this follows the tourneforts classes. You've got Campaniformis here, Perforati, Cruciformis, Rosacea, and on page 8, I just wanted to show you under Anomaly, you've got Viola palustris. And it's interesting that a lot of the plants that he has seen and possibly collected was very close to home. So you have here in Swedish that it's in Stenborghult and in the facade of the building, which I presume is probably his own home. Okay. Oh yes, and we come to the end of Småland, and you've got this illustration of the species that is described here, Betula palustris nana, with the indication that this is in tab 1, figure 1, so it's this. And this is quite interesting because Linnaeus would later publish a dissertation on the dwarf birch in 1743, just entitled Betula nana. So you've got these kind of interests that are already starting and that get developed later. So we come to the plants of Skåne. And these are classified according to Augustus Rivinus. I'll just quickly show you the space allocated to Rivinus in Manuscripta Medica, and which follows basically the same format as Tournefort, with a diagram for the main classes and then many tables that go into the classification of Rivinus. Rivinus divided the plants into 18 classes, and they're based on the regularity and number of petals, but also on the fruit. And I think only 3 of these classes were published in his lifetime. And the classification in here goes up until, oh no, it goes for quite a long time. So it's an extensive, complex classification, which Linnaeus uses for Skåne. And Linnaeus seems to have struggled with this section because it has lots and lots of crossing outs, which I haven't been able to check. I mean, these crossing outs in Linnaeus's later manuscripts indicate that the information was copied elsewhere and that it's been dealt with. So whether these were copied in a clean manuscript for Roberg, I don't know. What I also find intriguing, this figure 2 actually refers to plants that are in the previous section. The table 3 here is where this particular plant is illustrated, and that has been relegated to the end of the volume. So there's a little bit of, it's less carefully arranged than the previous section. What's really interesting in here is that there are indications that there were links to dried specimens and that some plants basically correspond to specimens that Linnaeus had. So you've got this entry here for Centaurum Chiale, which is now Centorium erythraea, which is the common centaury. And Linnaeus states that he's found it, oh, this is very small, but he's basically found it in Lund, which is here. And then he notes on the field acres, and then he notes that it's still in my dry garden. Right at the bottom here, you have Horto Sicco, which is basically an indication that Linnaeus already had a herbarium. And what form this was, we don't know. So I'm going to show you the one specimen that we have of this particular plant in the herbarium downstairs, just to illustrate how hard it is to find well, I tried to find any plants that may be connected to this particular volume. And as you can see, there's very little information on Linnaeus's herbarium specimens. Here, I know that this is the genus Gentiana because it's in the folder for Gentiana, and you've got Centorium here at the bottom. The little 14, which is indicated here at the bottom, means that Linnaeus used this when he was compiling Species Plantarum in 1753. And while this is a plant that was sent to him from Algiers, this has no provenance, and in many cases there is just simply no provenance for a lot, especially the early herbarium specimens. So I was wondering, if you look through the manuscript, there are lots of little ticks which are next to some plants, and I have been wondering, and I went through all of them to try whether any of our herbarium specimens could be linked to these, but I drew a complete blank. It's not that we don't have equivalent herbarium specimens, it's just that there's no provenance. This one is ticked twice as well and then crossed. So this is a mystery. I simply don't know. And there are some specimens that could be. So for example, we have specimens that unusually for Linnaeus have the genus name at the top, and these are usually quite early sheets, but as you can see, there's absolutely nothing here to indicate what the species is. And again, we go back to the fact that I'm not a botanist, but also whether it could be linked to the species of Euonymus, which is listed under the plants of Scania or Skåne. Okay, I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to move on, I think, to the last section of Roslagen, which is here, and which follows the Ray classification. So again, I'm going to show you quickly because it's quite different, actually. Ray had clearly quite a lot of importance for Linnaeus, but instead of taking notes on Ray with a diagram in tables, we have a good nearly 20 pages of notes on Ray's classification. And I think this is because this is taken from his Methodica Stirpium Britannicum, which I don't know if any of you have ever looked at, but it is a very dense work and very difficult to extract information in diagrams and tables. So instead, we've got this kind of huge note-taking exercise from Linnaeus. And the decision to classify the plants of Roslagen according to Ray. So Ray classified plants into two major groups: non-flowering or imperfect plants and flowering or perfect plants. And the latter was further divided into monocots and dicots. The advantage of Ray's system was that it focused on using multiple plant features for classification, which of course Linnaeus will go away from in his sexual system. I think the main thing to keep from the listing here is that Linnaeus mentions Celsius quite a great deal. So the trip in June was quite important for this catalogue. We have here, for example, two types of fungi, Erinaceus, the first one, Corniplea, which is now Lycoperdum stellatum, and Erinaceus below, which is now Hydrum oriscalpium, the pinecone mushroom. Both of these were collected in the first one in a small coal mine, and both of them were given to Celsius for his own Flora Uplandica, which I think was never published. And you can see various mentions of the trip to Roslagen here, på Roslagen reisen, which means during the trip to Roslagen. At the end of the manuscript, clearly Linnaeus reused it for yet another trip. So you've got here Dalecarlica. This is another region, a mining province where Linnaeus went in 1734, and I assume that these notes, which then go onto the next page, date from that later period. So to conclude, I think the manuscript is interesting because it showcases Linnaeus getting to grips with various systems of classification, but most importantly, implementing them in the field and the tentative applications of each system, which one works best in the field. The later annotation and the fact that it was still in his collection when it was purchased by our founder probably indicates that he never gave it to Roberg, and I hesitate to say whether there was a second copy because this is just so detailed. Linnaeus seems to have favored a tournefort system in the end, and we know that as well because in 1730 and 1731 he finally got a job. He became demonstrator at the Uppsala University garden, and he produced a series of 5 manuscripts which catalogue the plants of the garden, and the first catalogue, one of whom is within our collections, the other ones are at Uppsala, use tournefort system, and this is the system that he was using when he was teaching the plants in the garden. But interestingly, as early as 1731, and a few weeks later after his last catalogue, he produced another copy that arranged the plants for the first time according to his own sexual system, which, as we know, would be published in Leiden some 4 years later in 1735 in his work Systema Naturae. But that's an entirely different story, and I will stop here. Thank you very much. And sorry if I've overrun slightly.
Not at all. Thank you, Isabelle. That was fascinating. That's not a manuscript I knew at all well, so that was really informative for me. We've got about 10 minutes left in our session for any questions, so if you do have any things you would like to ask, pop those into the Q&A box. We've got a couple already. Firstly, Anya says the Swedish pronunciations are between completely understandable and almost perfect. So
I thought it was going to be much worse. Thank you.
But before we pat ourselves on the back too much, she says that Skåne and Småland are the other way round on the map. So
oh God, no, that's bad.
Shamefully, my Swedish geography is not the best either. Teresa, I think you answered this during the course of your presentation. She asked, did he make this object to sell? You sort of intimated that it was like a calling card, a patronage device. Do you want to expand on what maybe he sort of hoped to get from his
yeah, no, I think, as I said, I think this, as you say, is probably a calling card. So we've got at the University of Uppsala, the other 2 manuscripts are one of them dedicated to Celsius, the other one to Rudbeck. This one is to Roberg, and you've got here most of the important university professors at Uppsala in 1729. So he's basically covering all bases to try and get a job. And the fact that there is this letter to the administration of Uppsala University in July of that same year asking for the job of gardener, which he was denied actually. I think Rudbeck decided that he was far too talented to become a gardener and eventually he became the demonstrator. So he's clearly looking for a position, basically. And part of the reason why he goes to Falun and Dalecarlia in 1734 is because he's unsuccessful in getting another position. So these years for Linnaeus, and I do strongly recommend Broberg's biography for that, for these kind of that we're used to thinking of Linnaeus as this tremendously important person, but actually these are very, very uncertain years for Linnaeus, and it was nowhere near certain that he would get to where he wanted to be, which he did in the end. But we have to remember, maybe place ourselves back when we were 20, 22, and not knowing what was going to happen in our life. And I think that manuscript illustrates that quite beautifully.
Jodie says she loves how simple his drawings are. Did he become more skilled at botanical drawing as he got older? I think we know the answer to this, or did he employ others to do drawings to complement his texts?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Back in my academic days, I did write a whole article on Linnaeus's relationship to illustrations. And because he's got this reputation of being a really bad draftsman, I think for Linnaeus, it's the wrong way to look at it. Aesthetics is not so important. The structure of things is what is important. I don't think he has the patience to draw beautifully, which is why I think those flowers in Johann's book are probably not his. And perhaps because of that, or maybe because he distrusts illustrations, certainly at the level of the genus, Linnaeus decides that illustrations are untrustworthy. And so he relies much more on a textual description. And this is how, and you can see that from very early on in these manuscripts, the importance of almost like a controlled vocabulary to describe plant species. And I think he finds that much more reliable than a drawing. Having said that, when it comes to later on in his life, most of his big catalogues will be completely devoid of illustrations, except for his dissertations. And that's where you get species of plants, never genera, because he doesn't think a genus can be illustrated, but species of plants which are engraved usually at the end. But as to who does that, that's not Linnaeus. He employs other artists.
Jodie asks, is there a name for the binding method used?
Oh, you'd have to ask Janet, our conservator, but as far as I can tell, it's just simply sewn. Sorry, it's actually really delicate. You can see the sewing in the spine, and you can see it further. Sometimes some of the, I wonder if we shouldn't put this on Adoplin, actually, our adoption for being conserved. You can see some of the sewing. Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know. But if you want to send us an email, Janet will probably be able to. She's our conservator. She's got an extensive knowledge of bindings.
I think you might call it maybe a stationary binding. It's a book to be written in rather than a printed work that's been sewn up later.
Yeah.
Karen asks, do we know if Linnaeus brought any of these reference books along with him on the trips? And thank you for a wonderful talk.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of these trips, at least with Celsius, were like one-day affairs. So probably not. And at the time, we know that he didn't. I mean, there's the urine one, and I think the fact that he dated it, when he bought it and where, is an indication that it was actually quite rare for him to be able to buy a book. He's, Linnaeus at this stage is quite poor. There's also a famous episode in Celsius' house where he's found in the library out of hours with a candle, and when he wasn't supposed to be there. And after that, Celsius decides to let him have full access to his library because he recognizes what an industrious student Linnaeus is. So at the time, he doesn't really have those books. I think what would be more interesting to know whether when he left Sweden for the continent in 1735, we know he took several manuscripts with him, and Fundamenta Botanica, the one that I showed you earlier on with that cover, was certainly one of them, because it became the foundations for his book called Fundamenta Botanica. But I don't know if he took that particular manuscript with him. There is not really any way of knowing, but it would be interesting if he had.
Gina observes that the Gentiana specimen has an annotation to the right of the stem and wonders if that might be a place name, possibly.
On the herbarium specimen?
Yes, Gentiana centaurea.
To the right of this one.
Yes.
Yeah, that's Algeria. That's a later. That's from one of his correspondence. So that's definitely later. I don't know if this is from the same origin. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if that answers the question.
I think we've got time for one more question from Anne. Thank you both for the care and thoughtfulness you gave to this talk. Does the Society hold any of the field notes, rather than the publications, of Matthäus Lobel? We have some of his publications, I know. I don't think we have any manuscripts of his.
That's earlier, isn't it? No, I do remember a long time ago having a look, and I don't think so. Yeah. But Anne, I mean, again, just email us if anyone has a question. And possibly you were going to say that, Will. I'm so used to chairing these sessions. Just send us an email at library@linnean.org, and one of us will be able to reply. But we do also have the archives catalogue, and I'm pretty sure I looked this up, and I don't think we do.
Sumia asks, could you tell me how I can learn about the conservation of these wonderful manuscripts? And I think, in a way, probably again, the best thing is to drop us an email, and perhaps our conservator can correspond with you.
Yeah, I could say a quick word in that we had a huge Mellon Foundation project. This is when I started, actually, so it was 2013, which was to do it was threefold, and it included the cataloging of the manuscripts, their conservation, and their digitization. And that's when they were digitized and put on our digitized collections platform. And so these manuscripts were all conserved, or if they needed to be at the time. I have noticed that the binding for Spolia Botanica is quite loose. And also the other manuscript that I've shown, Manuscripta Medica, I have a habit of showing this quite a lot during tours, and I think it's taking its toll. So we may have to retire it, because I know it was conserved, but some pages are a bit loose, so it may need a rest.
I think this probably will have to be the last question. Pamela asked, did Linnaeus rely on herbarium specimens rather than drawings, relied upon for his descriptions, I presume?
Yeah, I think it really depends, and you do find some drawings in amongst the herbarium specimens, so they're treated like herbarium specimens. I mean, in his later life, he's depended on what people send him mostly, and that can be written descriptions, that could be published descriptions, specimens, or indeed illustrations. And I think illustrations and specimens often are complementary, because from illustrations you can get an idea of the coloring, for example, which you don't really get as much from dried specimens. So yes, he did use illustrations, but I think it's safe to say probably that it's mostly about specimens, and of course live plants, if he can see them himself. So there's a lot, sorry, I should shut up. There's a lot of herbarium specimens that clearly come or were collected from the botanical garden in Uppsala, for example. That's usually written on the herbarium sheet. And these are cultivated plants that would have been in the garden, so live plants for Linnaeus to observe.
Well, thank you very much. That was a wonderful talk. Lots of lovely compliments coming in on the
Thank you.
chat and the Q&A. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Before we wrap up, there's just time to say that if you'd like to keep up with goings-on here at the Linnean Society, please do feel free to subscribe to our monthly newsletter, Linnean News, where you can see details of upcoming events. And to say that our next Linnean Lens installment will be on the 4th of November, and we're going to be joined by John Ablett, curator at the Natural History Museum, who will be talking about treasures of the Linnaean shells collection. That sounds really good. But in the meantime, thank you again for joining us, and we will see you next time.